everyone, it's Joe from the Wrong Channel. Today I figured I'd go ahead and just talk a little bit about something I've been working on recently. Now, as you can probably tell, this channel deals with many different sorts of topics. And recently I've been working on getting back into my retro game collecting. I had done a little bit of this maybe last year or the year before, but then I kind of fell out of it. So to preface where I'm going with my collection, I guess I'd just give you a little bit of a history of where I came from, like my childhood. Now, when we were growing up, it was me and my two sisters, so we didn't actually have too many games that were our own. We just shared all that we had. And we grew up with primarily the Super Nintendo. Although we did have places where we had access to the regular NES. Relatives, family, friends of that nature. So we did have experience with the Nintendo, just we didn't own one. Well, I think later on in life some of us bought our own Nintendo system and Nintendo games. But primarily we had Super Nintendo, and then later PlayStation and Nintendo 64 and all the newer systems. Anyway, since I grew up with the Super Nintendo, I wanted to start my collection primarily with the NES. And I'd gotten a handful of games previously, like I said, about a year or two ago when I first started my collection. But now that I've recently gotten into it again, I've made a couple of retro game hunting trips, to local game stores and pawn shops. So, the first day that I went out, I actually got a pretty decent little haul. I stopped at a local G2K Games, and what I came away with, I think I was just really lucky, because apparently somebody had recently brought in a collection of games. It was mostly Atari games, but they did have some NES games. And the first thing that I saw, which stood out to me, was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's one that I've wanted for a while, just haven't seen in stores. I should also point out that I could get games online, but, it's going to be more expensive for one, and I think it's just more fun to find these in stores and just locally and just getting lucky with prices. It's more of a thrill of the hunt. Oh, by the way, all the games I got some official Nintendo licensed dust covers with. They were $1 a piece. I mean, you can get them cheaper sometimes, but $1 each for the official Nintendo ones, that's still pretty good. And the next game that I got was Fester's Quest. There's a lot of people that don't really like this game. They think it's too challenging in some respects. And I can see where they're coming from. Some of the monsters do take an abnormal amount of shots to kill. So I can totally agree with them on that. But aside from that, it's still a pretty fun game. It's graphically very good for the NES. I haven't played too much of it so far, but I've played enough to kind of get a feel for the game. And eventually I'll get down to actually fully committing to it and hopefully beating it. So after that, I picked up Godzilla, Monster of Monsters. Now, this is one that I'd only seen a little bit about. But, I'm a fan of horror movies and classic monsters, so of course, gotta get Godzilla. Basically, it's kind of like it's a mixture of different kinds of games. You start off on the board, you're playing as Godzilla and Mothra, so you kind of get to choose between the characters. Basically, you play as Godzilla, and it turns into a side-scroller where you go through the board to the end of the level, and you beat the level. And as you beat levels, you get closer and closer to the main monsters from the classic Godzilla movies. So if you play as Mothra, it's a lot easier to go through the boards, because you basically just fly over top of everything. And I think most people probably play the game that way. But it's still a pretty fun game. Like I said, I haven't really had too much time to actually play these games a lot yet, but I've played each of them probably about at least a half an hour. So it's still just fun, going back in time kind of and exposing myself to things that I was aware of but wasn't actually able to experience when I was younger. Now, the final game that I picked up at G2K, it's not one that I'd actually heard of before or even really seen, but the cover certainly stood out when I saw it, and I figured I'd just go ahead and try blind buying it, and that is Kid Niki, the Radical Ninja. Now, unfortunately, this one has some writing on the back in permanent marker, so, aside from that, it's in good condition, so I picked it up. Now, this game is actually really interesting. It is difficult. It's got the kind of traditional, old-school Nintendo rules of if you get hit once, you're dead. So it's very challenging in that respect. But it's also very fun. You play as a ninja, and it's a side-scroller, and he's got some nunchucks. Now, I'm not sure if he gets other weapons later on, because like I said, I haven't really played these games too much, but you start out with nunchucks. And they're really responsive, and like you hit the button and hit the button, hit the button, really fast nunchucks, and you kind of need it because you constantly have enemies coming at you from both sides of the screen. And basically you just go to the right, like classic side scrollers. Like I said, haven't played it much, but from what I have played, it's really freaking fun. Yeah, it is difficult, but fun nonetheless. So I'll definitely be playing this one more in the future. And finally, on the first day of my retro game hunting, I stopped at a pawn shop. Well, there was one more stop after this, but I didn't get anything there. I'll talk about that later. So at the pawn shop, they had some Genesis games. And they also had some Super Nintendo games. The Super Nintendo games they had, I wasn't really interested in. Some of them I had, some of them were just sports games, and I'm not really into sports games. But the Genesis games they had one that I was looking for a while, and that is Castle of Illusion with Mickey Mouse. Now, this game's another platformer, side-scrolling platformer. I don't know why I want it so badly, because like when we grew up, we didn't have the Sega Genesis. We didn't have any of the Sega systems, really. I was the only one who had any kind of Sega system when I had the Game Gear, which I got for one of my birthdays, I think maybe my 10th or 11th birthday. And that's the only Sega product we had in our household until we got a Dreamcast. And as we all know, that didn't last very long. But, like I said, I really wanted this game, and I was lucky enough to find it at a pawn shop for $3. It was just for the cartridge, but still, that's a pretty good price. It's a fairly common game, but it's not the kind of game that you see copies of, like multiple copies of, at a game shop. So I was just happy enough to find it as just the cartridge. So as I was saying, we did make one final stop the first day, and that was to a newly opened independent game shop that we had been told about. Now, we know the owner of this shop is just getting started, and he needs to have his foothold to get started. It was a fairly small shop. He didn't really have too many retro games. It was mostly PlayStation and Xbox games. But the retro games that he did have were all overpriced. They were all like between $15 and $20. And in one example I can give, he was reselling a game that was from, I think, replayed from Blockbuster, and it had the pre-played price on it still from Blockbuster as $6.99. And then he, I guess, never bothered to take it off and put his own little sticker on there for like $15. I mean, I can understand you're going to mark the games up some because you have to make a profit, but it might be a good idea to take previous price tags off so your customers don't see how much of a markup it is, because more than 200%, that's a bit steep. I mean, I knew it was steep without even seeing the previous price tag, but you don't want to add insult to injury, you know? So not only were his games, what he had, overpriced, he did have some that were in box. That was nice, but like I said, still overpriced. He ironically had a homebrew game for the SNES. It was a Link to the Past homebrew. I don't exactly remember which one. I just remember that he wanted $200 for it. And no, you're not going to get $200 for this game. Yes, it's a rare one because it's a homebrew. Yes, it was on a cartridge with a nice label, and surprisingly, it even came with an instruction manual. A lot of the times you don't see instruction manuals with these homebrews. They might have like printouts or links to frequently asked questions pages, but rarely do you see them with an actual legitimate looking instruction manual. And of course, in looking at this game, I knock it off the shelf accidentally, and it falls on the ground, and it's $200, so I'm sweating a little bit. Fortunately, the shop owner himself wasn't selling it, he was just selling it for somebody else, so I don't think he cared too much about it, and after all, it's a Super Nintendo game, so those things are pretty durable. But I was still sweating. So that was the first day of my retro gaming hunting. And this weekend was another rainy weekend, so there wasn't too much anyone can really do, so I decided to go out again and do another retro game hunt. And this time, I just happened to get lucky again, and I guess somebody recently went to the G2K and unloaded another collection. Because this time, I walked away with I've never even heard of this game before, and it looked really interesting, so I figured I'd pick it up, you know. It's got a lot of great stuff going on in the cover artwork, so picked it up. And I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it's The Magic of Scheherazade. No, let's try that again. Scheherazade, something like that. It's actually a character from the Arabian Nights story, but turned into a video game. I actually played this one a good bit earlier. It's a pretty unique game. It's an RPG, and it's a lot like Legend of Zelda combined with Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, and kind of Final Fantasy 2. Not Final Fantasy 2, but Final Fantasy also. And I've never actually really played a game like that because, I mean, like I said, we didn't grow up with the NES, and I wasn't really ever into the Final Fantasy games. You know, I was aware of them, and I was aware of that type of game, but I just actually never played them. But this one I think I can actually get into, because it's that whole RPG element where you just randomly happen upon enemies and it's a turn-based fighting system. It's got that, but it's not primarily that. It's just a part of it. This game has a lot of different parts. I only picked it up for $5, so I think that was a pretty good price for this kind of game. Like I said, I've never heard of it before, so it was basically another blind buy, but I'm happy with it. Oh, and again, I got the Nintendo dust covers from G2K. All $1 each again. Now, the next game that I got was Yo Noid. Noid being the mascot for the Domino's pizza commercials in the 80s and 90s. Briefly, I think. And I think he... Wait, no. It wasn't Domino's. What was it? It was either Domino's or it was Little Caesars, but I'm pretty sure it was Domino's. I don't remember too much from the 80s. Sorry. But anyways, I picked this up. It was a decent price. All of these games are decent prices. The good thing about G2K is that unless the game is like specifically set aside behind a case, like is an in-box game, the prices are all the same across the board. You know, $4.99 per game. And that's a bad thing if you're trying to get a really common game, but it's also a good thing if you're trying to get a game like Yo Noid, where, yes, it's still kind of common, but not so common where everyone and their brother has it. So I think I got lucky with that one. Like I said, I've not played this before. I actually even have not played it yet, but I've seen other people play it. And it's a kind of fun side-scrolling game. You know, definitely a sign of the times of the 80s, because, you know, the Noid is very obscure by today's generations. They have no idea what the Noid is, and I barely remember what the Noid is, so I just had to have it. Now, the final NES game that I found at G2K, I was really actually surprised to find this, because I figured it would be like a more... It's still a fairly common game, I guess, but I figured it would be like more than what I was able to find it for. And that is Gradius. The original Gradius. Now, like I said, we grew up with Super Nintendo, so we had Gradius 3. And that's a fun game. That's a really fun game. Challenging later on in the game, but still super fun. And I know that the original Gradius is a lot like that. It plays a lot like that. So I just, you know, I had to pick it up, especially for $5. You know, great condition, a popular game like that, a great Konami game, great Konami title. Up, up, down, down, left, right, ABA, start. Come on, son. Konami code. Konami code. Or was it select? It's been a long time since I've had to use the Konami code, let me tell you. Now, the final purchase that I made today from G2K, it's a common game. It's for the Atari 2600. It's Haunted House. Like I said, I'm a fan of all things horror, so I picked up the Haunted House game. Funny thing is, I don't actually own a 2600, so I have no way of playing this game. But they were selling it for 99 cents, and I know that it's worth more than 99 cents, so, you know, I figured jump on it while I had the chance. And when I finally do get a 2600 and can play it, I got it. You know, it's like $1 for a game. Sure, son, sign me up. A little bit of smudge or something on it. But yeah, that's what I was able to pick up in my last two retro game hunts. And I'll probably be doing a lot more of it from now on. So I'll try to, you know, keep a little update video for the channel along the way, just to keep everyone who even watches these things, because right now I've got 1 subscriber, and that's a relative, so it doesn't really count. If you're thinking about starting a retro game collection of your own, you should totally do it, because you don't necessarily have to have the original systems. I mean, it's obviously better to have those if they work, but they now make newer systems that are capable of playing the older games. And in addition to that, you can easily start your game collection, because so many of the common games like Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers, you know, those are pretty cheap. And there are many others like them that are equally cheap. Like, you can get probably You can probably get some of these common games, maybe, if you're lucky, like $1 or $2 each. But be expected to pay more likely between $3 and $5, especially if you're going to game stores. If you go to flea markets and pawn shops, you can probably get better deals, but again, your selection's gonna be more limited unless you get really lucky. And you could find some gems. And that's another good thing about getting back into the retro game stuff. You can find all kinds of little gems here and there, and it'll just brighten your day when you do. And before I go, I'd like to give one quick shout out to the Game Chasers, because they're the ones that inspired me to get back into my retro game collection. I'll provide a link down here somewhere in the description so you can check out their channel. I'm sure I'm sure a lot of people are way more aware of them than they are of me, but in case somebody finds me first, check them out, because they are definitely much better at this sort of thing than I am. I'm just doing this mostly for myself, and maybe for whoever else would be interested in this kind of thing. But definitely check out the Game Chasers, because they're just awesome. Billy and Jay, they're just freaking awesome. They're bros. They're hilarious. Yeah. End of plug. Everybody have a good day. Take it easy. I'm Joe. I'll see you later.